And so we're going to talk about four different tiers: $100,000 in annual revenue, 250,000, 500,000, 750,000, and $1 million. Like what that might look like, what the duties might be for the PCO, and how those change. What does a company that's doing $100,000 in revenue, what does that kind of look like?
The $100,000 mark, I think, is somebody who you're on your way to a half a route, probably just transitioned from, working for someone else, another pest control company, to kind of doing their own thing. They probably have their own stuff. They have their own truck. They run their own route. They service their own customers. They probably sell their own customers, most likely. You're not seeing a whole lot of guys that are at that mark pushing for door-to-door or finding door-to-door salesmen, anything like that. That mark is probably the very beginnings of a new PCO.
You're listening to the Bug Bucks Podcast, hosted by Allan Draper and Eric Bassett.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Bug Bucks Podcast. I'm Allan Draper. As always, I've got Eric Bassett here with me. What's going on, Eric?
Hey, Allan. Not too much, man. Just getting excited for the season. We're just about to do a bunch of interviews for office staff, inside salespeople to kind of scale up for the busy season. So,
yeah,
dude, it's like, I keep saying it's right around the corner. The truth is it's here. It is among us.
Yeah, it's funny how there's, in a pest control company, the different roles have different busy seasons. And then the summer is kind of, stuff for some roles, our marketing team, our accounting, some of that stuff is like, it's just kind of put on cruise control. But for like door to door, for inbound sales, for service, customer service, that type of thing, for sure, there's that scale up, that jump up in activity. Awesome. We have a cool topic we're going to cover today. Before we get to that, for our listener, make sure that you go to our Facebook group. I talk about it all the time, Bug Bucks, BUGBUX on Facebook. We have great conversations in there, some really cool questions and discussions just popped up today. So make sure to go check it out. And we should be doing some giveaways. We probably need to follow up on that, but we should have always like a monthly giveaway that we have in there also, kind of just to give some equipment, some products back to you PCOs out there. So make sure to join that group. Also, if you could do me a favor, leave us a review on this podcast, whatever platform you listen to it on. Make sure to leave us a review, and also make sure to subscribe or follow, whatever it is, so you don't miss any new episodes that we drop. Those will automatically be downloaded to your device. So today, Eric, you and I talked about covering something that we haven't specifically covered before, and that is kind of the different milestones that a pest control company faces as they're scaling. And so we wanted to talk about a few as a company scaling up to about $1 million in annual revenue. And so we're going to talk about just in a roundabout way, four different tiers: $100,000 in annual revenue, 250,000, 500,000, 750,000, and $1 million. I guess that's five, and just kind of go through what that might look like for a PCO, what the duties might be for the PCO, and how those change, and kind of go from there. So let's kick it off with the $100,000. What does a company that's doing $100,000 in revenue, what does that kind of look like?
$100,000 in revenue, depending on your average contract value, like the recurring revenue per customer, let's just say that it's $500, $500 a year. So if we're going to divide 100,000 by $500, you got about 200 customers, right? I mean, that's not even technically kind of what you would consider a full route.
Exactly.
And if we're considering a full route, I don't know, how many customers would you consider a full route to be?
So if we're talking quarterly and, making some assumptions regarding reservice rate, I'm talking probably on the low end 500, on the high end 600.
Exactly. Yeah. So like you're on your way to a half a route at that point. The $100,000 mark, I think, is somebody who probably just transitioned from, working for someone else, another pest control company, to kind of doing their own thing. And they're picking up clients as they go, and they probably have their own stuff. They They have their own truck. They run their own route. They service their own customers. They probably sell their own customers, most likely. You're not seeing a whole lot of guys that are at that mark pushing for door-to-door or finding door-to-door salesmen, anything like that. So that mark is probably the very beginnings of a new PCO.
And I think the discussion changes if we're talking about like, hey, I'm at $100,000 and I'm 2, 3, 4, 5 years in, or I'm at $100,000 and I'm like a month in, right? So that could, because obviously both of our companies at one point, they were at $100,000. Now it was probably a lot earlier than the average company. But at $100,000, I'm kind of trying to think of what a PCO is doing. And in terms of marketing, like you kind of hit on this, they're probably not doing a lot of door-to-door unless they got there really quickly. And I think that's exactly right. I think they should be engaging a lot through Facebook HOA groups. And another thing they should really be hitting hard is referrals. They should be asking for referrals. They should be focusing on their Google My Business page. They should be requesting reviews. That's a really pivotal thing that they could be doing, something that will really move the needle for their company. Because if we're talking about 200 customers, these are rough numbers, folks. I'm just like ballparking it here, but they're probably spending, less than 20 hours a week actually doing services, and they're doing those services on their own. Now, if they're trying to scale quickly, they're looking to make a hire pretty soon, but they don't necessarily need one just yet. So those are the things. And then obviously, they're also, if they're taking some time to scale, they're also doing everything else for the business. They're ordering the product. They're making sure they have the equipment. They're doing the tax payments that need to be made. They're doing the payroll. All of those things they're doing on their own. And then I think at 100, before we hop to 250, they also need to start thinking about hiring, even at that level. And I'm going to give us kind of this arbitrary time frame here, Eric. I'm going to say, $100,000, maybe they knock that out in year one, but they're looking to double that revenue in the next 6 months, maybe this time of year, right? We're in March. And so now I'm trying to think of the mentality that a PCO should have, the duties that PCO should have. If they're sitting on 100,000 and they're trying to get to 250 in the next 6 months, let's call it by the end of summer.
Yeah. So in that scenario, you're growing, trying to hit that $250,000 mark. And I hope that the PCO at this point has been documenting all their stuff as they go.
Great point.
It's a huge advantage. Like if I could go back and start from the beginning, I would document every single thing that I did, and I would start building those processes and systems from the very beginning. I never did that. And they're very useful now, but they took time and effort when I was much busier. I wish I would have thought about doing it in the beginning. But so hopefully they've gone through all those processes. By the time that you're getting close to that $250,000 mark, I mean, if we divide it by the average contract value of 500, that gives us 500 customers, right? So that's a full route. At that point, you have kind of a big decision to make. Either you're going to stay a solo operator and you're kind of going to move around that ballpark of customers forever, or you are, like you're saying, looking to scale and move past that point. And if that's the case, you got to hire somebody. And you might have already hired somebody, realistically speaking, if you were kind of had some forethought. So maybe as you kind of eclipse that $200,000 mark, you look at bringing on a part-time guy.
No, I think this is a really good, you bring up a couple good points. Before I get to the specifics of that, I wanted to mention, you talked about documenting systems. I remember when I first started and I had this thought, hey, I should document this stuff. But I was concerned that it's like, dude, I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing. And so I didn't, but it would have helped me a lot if I had. And honestly, guys, I'm still like working on systems, proofs, over 8 years in at this point. We just had some change in our accounting department And I realized that our systems were not where they should have been. It was borderline embarrassing, but we're getting it figured out. It's a great opportunity for us to learn and move on. But what Eric said about documenting those processes, do it early. And it's not necessarily about, I think you can get some good ideas down. And I do understand this concern that, hey, stuff's going to change when I hire people, when I get other people involved, when, my company's bigger and all these things. But I think the larger point there is that the individual needs to create a habit of that, and change the mental state from one of, this is how we do it, and it's all in the owner's head, to, hey, I'm getting this out there, because what that's going to do is it's going to help you scale your company faster.
Yep. Yeah. And I think one of the things that owners have to change their mindset on is, in the beginning, you hold a lot of things really close to your chest. You really don't want to share any of your secrets. You've invested all this money into building your own company. And maybe for the guys who are planning on scaling, like if they know they're going to scale and they're going to build this thing, then they're a little bit more open with some of that stuff. But you got to start writing stuff down. If something happens in your business, or if there's a process in your company and you are the only guy with the answer, dude, you're the bottleneck. You're the liability. We've talked about that before. So, processes change. You will go back through your processes and systems and update them probably annually, if not semi-annually.
Yep, that's exactly right. And, this idea that you're keeping stuff close to the chest. If you're wanting to scale your company, you need to get over that. And it's easier to get over it earlier than later, because then earlier, there's not as much at stake, so to speak. But the way that I think about it is, there's nothing really at my company that at least a few other people shouldn't know about. There's not a single thing. There is. And if you put yourself in that position, it really takes a lot of pressure off of you and allows you to scale. So kind of going back to, your comment about the hiring. Okay. So 250,000, we're saying that's about a route, give or take. If you're wanting to scale your company fairly quickly, and we touched on this at the 100K level, you're looking for a tech there. And by the time you get to a full route, you have somebody, you mentioned part-time. That's a great idea until they get caught up to speed. But you, as a PCO, if you're trying to scale your company, you have enough to do, never getting into a truck if you have one route. And I know a lot of PCOs that are going to have a problem with me saying that. But I think that is going to be key, getting out of that truck early. And if there's a 1-star review, a super ticked off customer, a really big account, a quote, that needs to be made on site, all those things, that's okay. At that stage, I think it's okay. But I think that's the key from getting from 250 to 500, is getting that PCO out of the truck and getting him or her working on their company and not for it at that stage. And what I mean by that, Eric, is they need to be thinking about processes. And by the way, I'm just going to say it right now, that's going to be at every level. In my opinion, that goes without saying. They're going to be focusing on their processes and their systems at every level. But then also things such as marketing and management, training, and getting really good people, I think are at least those first couple of key hires, which are your first and second and third hires, are so much more important than your 50th, your 51st. Those are still important, but you're using those people to build your company, and you're not going to be perfect. And you're going to make mistakes with them, but keep that in mind. And that's going to help you get to that 500,000.
100%. And, just like you were saying, those first few people that you hire are crucial, because, if you have a technician that you've obviously hired as your first technician, you've built all the relationships with all your customers, right? And now you're going to hand over those relationships to that guy. So you got to make sure that he's the right dude. He's going to treat those relationships, those customers the right way, right? And it's the same thing when you eventually hire an office person. We'll get to that point in a minute. But the point is that person is going to be the voice that your customers hear when they call, right? They might hear your voice for a while. You might answer the phone for a bit, and that's okay. But yeah, at this point, at that $250,000 mark, if you're looking to scale, you have hired that guy, and you are looking for ways to keep that guy busy and build your company so that you can hire another guy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Once you get to that $500,000 mark and on your way there, you're going to need to rely on more than just word of mouth, friends and family, clover leafing. You're going to need to have a marketing plan to get there. And I think that's where it really kicks in. The idea is, depending on how fast you scale, to have the plan in the beginning. But at this stage, from 250 to 500,000, I think is when you start implementing that and you decide, hey, we're gonna try some door to door, or we're going to do some serious digital advertising, especially if you're wanting to do that. And I'm giving, most of what I'm saying is going to be with the assumption that we're hitting these tiers, give or take a year, which is totally possible. So you're from 100 to 250, I think is going to be your toughest jump, right? And it's the largest percentage growth. From 250 to 500, you're still doubling. But your percentage growth isn't as much. And so you're not going to have the time to do those Facebook group referrals and things like that. Those are still going to be the highest quality leads. It's just tough to get the volume with the input, the time input and commitment there. And so you have to spread out and find out what type of, not just marketing, but specifically lead generation that you're going to do. I think at this stage, you can start to think about your brand a little bit, but if I'm the one in charge, I'm still focusing on lead gen and growing my company at that stage.
Yeah, exactly. And, if we're talking about, focusing on marketing, just like you said, you're at this point, you've kind of exhausted all of your close networks, like your friends and family, all those people you've talked to. They either have your service or probably aren't going to buy your service.
Exactly.
And you've done all these other things. You have your GMB profile squared away. You get some organic calls every now and again. Maybe you've even built partnerships with other companies that give you leads, like other types of contractors, et cetera. And that's all great. But at 500,000, you could be squaring away possibly, we talk about maybe like a 5% to 15% of your gross revenue towards like a marketing budget. You could be putting $35,000 to $60,000 towards marketing. And the nice thing about that is that you don't necessarily have to have all that money right at the beginning of the year. You can kind of push that money into marketing as it comes in, and you can phase that marketing over time, depending on your market. So, maybe you spend nothing in January, February, maybe you spend, $2,500 in March and $2,500 in April, and kind of on and on. And at the end of that year, you've spent $35,000, $40,000, $50,000. And if you've done it the right way, maybe you've gleaned yourself, let's see, $50,000. You could get another couple hundred customers from that, depending on cost per lead and closing rate and everything else.
I think that's a really good point. And that's a huge difference between doing more traditional marketing versus door-to-door direct marketing. Because when you go the door-to-door route, and it might be too early, if I'm a company at $500,000 or trying to get there, I'm thinking, especially if I'm hitting these stages year after year, I'm thinking it's still too early to go door to door, because a lot of that cost is up front and you're not realizing. Think about it. I'm paying, if I'm using a marketing company, I'm paying 90+%. If I'm doing it on my own, I'm paying probably 60+%. And so I'm not realizing the full value of those accounts until a year and a half plus after they're sold, which is a long time after you've already paid out on them. So at 500,000, and I don't think you necessarily need a door-to-door team to hit these marks 1 year to the next. I think you can do it without. Now, if you're trying to do this, 100 to 250 in a month, 250 to 500 in a month or 2 or 3 months, then let's get something that's going to produce a lot of volume. door to door. So at 500,000, we're talking about give or take 2 full routes. I think the PCO is, involved in long-term decisions while still doing some day-to-day. They're still at 500,000 with 2 routes. If I'm the PCO, I'm still running payroll myself or my spouse, right? Somebody that's helping me, not necessarily on payroll. I'm still doing a lot of that, day-to-day stuff, but I have my eye toward the future and getting to that 750, which would be a 3rd route. Now, when you're starting and you make your first technician hire and your second, you need to be focused on finding leaders. And I have this discussion with people that are early in one of my branches is that, hey, our vision for you is not just to be a technician. Now we have branch managers in place and regional managers that help them. But the idea is for that first couple of for those first couple of techs is that they become your service managers, they become your training technicians and things like that, which is another reason why those first few hires are so much more important, comparatively speaking. And so at 500, you have a couple of routes and I think you're wanting to develop some type of either training technician or quasi service manager, something to help you get to that 750,000 mark.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and you should have that first guy, maybe it's the guy that you hired first or the second guy or whichever, but I agree. You've got a service manager, somebody who's in training, a lead tech.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that a lot.
Lead tech. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Just somebody who can kind of have a little bit of extra responsibility that you are training and developing to take over that role. And it's little things here and there. Now he's ordering product, now he's helping you with projections.
Exactly.
All the important urgent stuff that, the other technicians can take care of. This guy's going to be doing the not necessarily urgent, but very, very important stuff, right? So that you can expand and do some other quadrant 2 stuff. The other thing I was going to say is, depending on how you're marketing your company and how much you're planning on growing and whether or not you're putting money into marketing, 1,000 customers, $500,000 could be a really good opportunity for you to get an office admin. And that person would be responsible, depending on how you do it. I prefer hybrid reps in the beginning.
Absolutely.
Right. It's easy. It's scalable, and whether they're part-time, full-time, but they take all the inbound calls, they help with technician logistics, they do routing, they take inbound leads, they do billing, they do retention, all that stuff.
The really cool thing about getting somebody that can do a lot of things is 2 points. First of all, as you're starting to offload some of these, like what seem to be smaller duties from the PCO to this lead technician in training or this training technician in training, it's good for both of you. It's good for you because you're letting go, some of the stranglehold on your company. You're freeing up some of your time. It's good for them because it's increasing responsibility. They're seeing that you trust them, and you got to be testing the waters with that. And by the way, as you're making that move, you're going to have to make that decision before you become comfortable with that decision. And a lot of people do that the other way. They wait until they're comfortable with someone. And it's just not how you scale a company. You have to trust them first. And then whether they, sink or swim, that's going to be up to them. But I love this idea of, as you're getting from 500,000 to 750,000, bringing this hybrid role in, because, and it's a really cool position. I can imagine me sitting down with somebody that's really talented in a lot of different ways. They're organized. They can use some technology. They can use a voice over IP phone, create an Excel spreadsheet. They're charismatic. They can talk to somebody. So I can imagine sitting in front of them and recruiting them to my company and saying, hey, here's the cool thing is it, 1, you're helping us build this company. 2, you're going to get first dibs on whatever position you want as we hire somebody to fill another position. So you get to that 750,000, maybe knocking on $1 million. Now you're like, okay, well, this person can't do all inbound calls, customer service, inside sales. They can't help me with marketing, help me with payroll, help technicians with logistical issues. call aheads, whatever it is. They can't do all of that. So we're going to bring someone else in and let that first person decide what they like and what they like the most and what they were really good at, and go from there.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's one of those things that based on the amount of work that needs to be done early on, it's just so much more efficient to have that first person do all those kind of different things as things are growing. And then as you scale and get bigger, you actually have the decision to make, okay, do I want to have hybrid reps throughout my entire company? Do I want to have specialized departments, which that has their pros and cons? But at least you give yourself the opportunity to make that choice. And you allow that person that you first hired the flexibility and autonomy to do what they're best at, which is awesome, which is really what you want them doing anyway.
100%. That's exactly right. All right. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. Let's wrap this conversation up. Getting that company to $1 million, which is, I hear a lot from guys that are like, Allan, by the end of the year, $1 million. I've heard that so many times, which I think it's a great marker. It really is. It's kind of something you can be excited about. And, a $1 million revenue company that has some longevity, high retention, solid customer base, high contract value, that company's worth more than $1 million. It just is. So think about that, for the PCO to have that $1 million asset that could get a decent multiple on the market. But at $1 million, we're talking give or take 4-ish routes. What does the personnel look like in your mind at that level, assuming that the company is going to follow kind of a similar trajectory of growth?
So we've got $1 million worth of revenue, and you've got, that's what, 2,000 customers, give or take, at what we were talking about before.
Yep.
So you probably have, I would hope, you have 2 leaders. You've got, a technician guy, a lead tech, if you want to call him a service manager, either way. Same thing with the office person, office manager, office specialist, whatever that is. But you've really identified those 2 people. And they are taking the majority of your workload away so that you can focus on growth mechanisms for the business. Within those departments, you probably have, a few different technicians along with that guy. Hopefully, and by this point, you should be long out of the truck. Like, there really shouldn't be much of anything you're doing. All the specialized quotes that you're giving, the bids, inspections, that should be going to that lead guy, right? He should know how to do all that. Any of the big important phone calls for clients should be going to that lead office person. Maybe you're still doing payroll. Maybe you're still kind of helping to prepare taxes, and maybe you're doing some P&L work. You should probably be associated or involved with your P&L anyway. Within the office staff, I think that there are 2.5 people, maybe, depending on how you have it set up. Hybrid wise, you could do that. Sometimes I've told people that if you have hybrid reps, you can pull off, half to 1 person per 1,000 customers. It really depends on how you have things set up. But yeah, so you're probably looking at a staff of 5 to 6 plus you.
Gotcha. At this point, you're getting from 750 to $1 million. Your biggest expense is going to be your payroll, and depending, really, it comes down to your marketing budget. You should be making some decent money. You should be at least making a 10% net margin. In my opinion, if you were methodical about it. I think the other thing that it comes down to is the owner involvement. And there's owners that they want to free their time up for all sorts of different reasons. Some of them want to slam on the gas pedal and just they'll spend even more time working, but it's more on the growth side. It's more on the recruiting side and building their company. Some, maybe they have some other professional responsibilities or they're doing a side project. Others want to spend more time with their family or vacationing. But at this stage, they're able to do that. So if a PCO is, I hope at $1 million they are in a position where they don't have to work more than 20 hours a week. And what I mean by that is basically just putting out fires. They should have systems and that personnel that you talked about in place where the company could operate, and then some weeks it might fluctuate. They might have somebody out, or they might need to replace a technician that left for one reason or another. But that would kind of be a decent target if I'm a PCO, where it's like, hey, I'm at $1 million in annual revenue, even if I haven't realized that $1 million, right? If I have $1 million or more in recurring revenue or projected revenue, then I should make sure, and I think this would be a good rule of thumb for people to check right now. If you're at or near that, how much time do you have to spend on your company just for it to operate? And and I guess there could be some variances there, and I'm kind of just making this up on the fly, but it makes a lot of sense to me that if you're spending significantly more than 20 hours a week working for your company, then I think, some adjustments need to be made. And one of those adjustments might be who your personnel are.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of scenarios where I've talked to a lot of PCOs, especially like if you are running your own door-to-door program. Mm-hmm. Maybe you spend significantly more than 20 hours a week, just because you might be knocking with these guys and doing all sorts of other stuff. Like, I don't know if people realize that if you run your own door-to-door program, it's almost like running two businesses concurrently at the same time. Like you are running the marketing mechanism for your company.
Exactly.
And you have the operations mechanism. So, depending on how you're growing and how things are going, you could spend a lot more time. But if you were just hanging around, $1 million mm-hmm. and you weren't pushing a bunch of stuff, like you have maybe a marketing company or somebody that's handling marketing for you, you really should have a lot of the operational side of the business pretty mm-hmm. squared away with your staff.
Agreed. Yep. As we're, wrapping up here, my final thought, Eric, is that one thing to keep in mind for the PCO as they're scaling is that you are going to lose customers at a faster rate. And I'm not saying that your cancellation rate is higher, but as you grow, if you have, 20% attrition, that 20%, the number of customers is now larger because you're at 2,000 customers versus 200. So now you're losing, 400 a year that you have to replace to stay on top of things. So that's something to consider as well. And hopefully through those systems, the cancellation rate, the attrition rate goes down a little bit, but you're still going to have, in terms of just raw numbers, that's still going to increase. So you have to focus on how to get those replaced and still scale your company. And once you get to $1 million, marketing becomes such a large part. Just, it really comes down to retaining the customers you have, cross marketing different types of services, ancillary services, termite stations, tick and mosquito, more robust rodent programs, things like that, while also acquiring new customers. That's kind of where at 1 million, you really slam on the gas with those types of practices.
Definitely. Yep. Yeah. 100%.
All right, man. Well, we just covered, it's simple. Why doesn't everybody do it? Right. we just showed you how to get to $1 million. Joking, obviously, because there's a lot of work involved, but industry definitely, is one that can handle that type of growth. And especially because of the recurring revenue, folks. Sometimes we forget how blessed we are to be in this industry. There's a lot of, think of like a restaurant. Now, of course, they're going to have repeat business, right? They're going to have people that come every once in a while, but we literally have a schedule. Can you imagine if restaurants are like, all right, man, we're going to give you 20% off, 50% off your meal today, but we're going to require that you come back every 2 or 3 months or whatever the schedule is. That's might not be a bad idea, right? But we have that recurring revenue so that we don't start over every time we market to a new customer, So that's, a huge benefit of getting to this mark. So again, make sure to join our Facebook group. If you have questions about this episode, and every once in a while, Eric, I'll get people, they text me, and a lot of people will text me about things that you said, actually, where they're like, yeah, Eric mentioned about his truck, like, or they'll, in the Facebook group, they'll bring it up. But by all means, like, do not hesitate. If there's something that you want more information on that we talked about, because we did kind of a flyby. I mean, we covered the path from, $0 to $1 million in about 30 minutes. So there's details, obviously, that we overlooked or, well, we didn't get into. But if you have questions that pertain to your exact situation, hit Eric or I up or post in our group, and we'll get some answers out to you. But in order to do that, you have to be part of our Facebook group, Bug Bucks, BUGBUX. Make sure to join that, and we'll catch you next time.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please show your support by subscribing and leaving us a 5-star rating. Thank you, and we'll catch you on next week's episode.